What's up, fellow nerds? Phreak here. It's time for patch 9.7 in League of Legends. To my knowledge, 9.7 is the MSI patch. I could be wrong, but that's what I remember seeing or hearing. If I'm wrong, then it's patch 9.8, but I don't think so. Either way, move on. It's conjecture regardless. Cool. 9.6 was what we've seen so far in the LCS and LEC playoffs. I believe that will remain the playoff patch for many of the other leagues, such as LCK and LPL. Otherwise, I think it's been a pretty interesting patch. 9.6 seems pretty fine, other than a few champions being clearly pretty broken. They're mostly getting nerfed here. A couple other small things to bring up is that it seems as though, at least for a little while now, the Summoner's Rift team has been doing not automated buffs and nerfs. That's not the right term for it, but there's a sort of automated system that buckets together champions that probably should be buffed or nerfed. There's a post on it that you can try to find either on Reddit or the official forums or somewhere, but it came out within the last month or so. And basically what it says is, hey, if a champion is not picked in pro and is low win rate basically in all levels of play, it's on the list to be buffed because it's not good anywhere, so buff this champion. Conversely, if a champion is like, I don't know, something like 80% presence in pro or like absurdly high win rate in any of the various skill brackets they look at, hey, this champion's busted somewhere, nerf it so players can have fun. And nerf it to somewhere where it's not underpowered for all levels of play, but get it out of the absurd level. I think it's really cool. I think it's a really good thing. There's still, of course, the room for the designers to be like, hey, let's make good choices and balance this champion appropriately for each level of skill and try to find things that can bridge those gaps. But this seems to be happening. In fact, if you look at the patch notes, there will be like 2 champions listed by themselves and then a big bucket called simple changes. And that appears to be the automated tool saying, hey, here's stuff you should look at this patch. Maybe that's wrong, but that's what it looks like to me. Either way, let's talk about the patch itself. We're into the mix. There's a highlight video. If you want to watch that instead of this, go ahead. Kayle is indeed very strong. The 9.6 changes ended up being power up because your E attack getting out quickly is really valuable. Your W not disarming you for almost a full second, also really valuable. But she did lose some stats. Health regen growth went down. Armor growth went down as well. So her late game is worse. Her Q mana costs are worse. Her W mana cost is worse, but the movement speed is even more worse. That's a phrase. I think so. The E rank up is worse, but it scales with ability power a little bit. So what does this mean for Kayle? Well, here's her armor before and after. She is about up to 5% less durable against physical damage. That seems fine. Here's her regen before and after. Is down a little bit. Okay, fair enough. That's a thing. Cool. What's next? Well, I want to point out the W mana cost actually is cheaper at low ranks and more expensive at late ranks. That said, she probably never should at max W and is gonna have even less incentive to now. Kind of want to bring that up, that rank 1 of the abilities not much worse. We'll get into that in a second. So here are the Q and E changes. Once again, the Q change is a flat 10 mana cost increase. The E is 2 to 4% less missing health damage with 1% per 100 AP. Well, here's the 10 more cost. Q, at least as far as solo Q is concerned, is most frequently maxed second, which means E is maxed first, which means here's this table right here. The full value of the nerf on E is at level 9. It's, of course, 20% less damage on the active bonus damage at all times. No one's surprised by that. But here is the quick table for how much ability power it takes to equal that nerf and bring it back up. It's 2 to 400 ability power. Now, very end game Kayle builds can reach this much, but considering her most frequent builds, even if they are ability power, are Gunblade and Nashor's and Rageblade, you need like 4 or 5 items to get there. Most games don't go to 4 or 5 items, thus this is, in aggregate, definitely a nerf. These are overall very big nerfs to Kayle. This matters quite a bit. She's going to be more mana constrained. One thing we've been seeing when she was brought out in pro is people were going for Resolve Tree secondary. As far as solo queue is concerned, That's really comparable to getting sorcery secondary for Mana Flow Band. Mana Flow Band, of course, can help alleviate this mana cost concern. Also keep in mind, if you are spamming W, you do get 10 mana back on each one. Here is this. The mana cost is better up until level, well, okay, it's 17, it's nerfed, but who cares? At this point, it doesn't matter. At this point, you're not running out of mana in fights anyway. Wing to stay alive will help a little bit. 10 mana back per cost. If you're going to cast it 7 times or 6 times, you can cast it a 7th time, which means you get like, I don't know, 60 more health back based on the regen. 60 regen, is several minutes. So, all right, whatever. Anyway, yeah, here's the haste difference. It's not very large. I believe it already has an AP ratio on it, so it means even less overtime to ability power builds because of diminishing returns and things like that. So this is very minor. It's a little fiddly. Ultimately, these feel like nerfs that mostly hit AD Kale more than they hit AP Kale. From what I could tell, it didn't seem like either build was far better than the other. This probably makes you more likely to build AP Kale. So that probably shifts the build over towards going Gunblade more often. That said, I do want to point out that, for example, Kale's Empowered E, meaning level 6 and onwards, applies on hit effects the entire AoE. That's very good for things like Blade of the Ruin King. So you should still kind of consider that being a build. She's a good Blade of the Ruin King user. If you are trying to kill tanks, you might want to go AD Kale as a result. Again, pros are mostly going AP, and either way, these are nerfs. These are fairly big. She probably loses a solid like 3% or so off this. It's weird because like that's kind of small, that's kind of small, that's kind of small, that's kind of small, that's actually a buff, and this is kind of small. But every time I overanalyze and go, well, but the changes aren't that big, it ends up being a bigger nerf than I thought. So I'm going to keep myself from overanalyzing and stick to my roughly 3% power down. I think that's reasonable. At least 2%. I'd be shocked if it was less than 2%. That's possible. I'm human, but pretty big nerf. I'm probably going to stop picking Kale every game next patch because she's no longer broken. She will still be strong. She's probably out of pro entirely unless the metagame changes. But that's fine. Kale is fun. Next up, big changes to Urgot. Urgot, definitely an overpowered top laner. I streamed a game of Urgot a couple days ago. I got slammed in lane and still came back and hard carried. Well, I shouldn't say hard carried. Was a very big threat, despite having a 0-5 start to the game. That's an anecdote. The data says Urgot is definitely overpowered. As far as solo queue is concerned, he's mostly overpowered as a top laner. In pro play, he's actually being played as a jungler. I am shocked we are not seeing more Urgot in pro play. I think he's very, very, very strong. We should be seeing him more. Even despite these nerfs, I still think he will be viable at the MSI. I think he should still be played throughout the rest of the 9.6 playoff runs. Yeah, stuff like that. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, Urgot's passive goes from 2-3-4-6-8 to 2-3-4-5-6. E's cooldown goes up at early ranks. Keep in mind, E is something you should probably be maxing last. The mana cost is up by 10, and the R damage is down by a flat 25, because that's roughly what compensation the ability got when the Urgot like quasi rework last patch came in. So it's kind of just a revert of that buff. Otherwise, let's see what happened to Urgot. Well, I want to point some things out with Urgot's passive. Urgot's passive does two things. It has the max health damage, as we pointed out earlier, and it also has a percentage of Urgot's total AD that also scales up with champion level. Either way, there is no change at all to Urgot's damage via his passive in the first 10 levels, so his jungle clear and his early laning phase are literally untouched. Only at level 11, where 6 becomes 5%, is it a nerf. E's mana cost is up by 10. The cooldown is up by 2 seconds. That does matter. And again, E is something you max last and will continue to max last. Actually, I want to bring up one thing I started seeing a little bit of. Some people are doing W max, E max, and leaving Q at one point. Mostly to get a bigger E shield and simply be more of a bruiser. That's going to be more viable now with the cooldown also scaling with E rank. You are more incentivized to put points into E. I don't think it's going to be the C change that actually makes everyone flip over, but it might be a little bit more common. Either way, with how strong Urgot seemed to be, he, I think, deserves these sorts of nerfs. 10 mana cost is not going to mean very much. Urgot doesn't seem terribly mana constrained in early lane. It depends if you spam Q or not, but you don't really have to. The cooldown here is going to mean a little bit. So here is... the quick little bit of the rest of the Urgot passive. Roughly half the damage from the passive comes from the health scaling. Roughly half comes from his attack damage. So the nerf is eventually from levels 11 onwards, 9 to 14%. This nerf means more the more you hit tanks. This nerf means less the more attack damage you buy. Still a nerf. Here's the cooldown difference, fairly meaningful. Here's the cost difference, fairly meaningful. This overall seems fairly small. I'd put it at maybe 1.5%. Depending on how much the late game really matters, this does mean a fair bit. If the late game really, really matters, it's upwards of that, but I'm going to stick to my maybe 1.5% off of Urgot here. And now here is the bucket of, hey, this champs week everywhere. Now what's interesting is what's actually kind of like this. There's a bunch of champs that were changed recently, right? Cho'Gath and Azir run the patch notes recently. And the design team took light touches trying to push the champions just up enough that they would be viable in pro and okay in solo queue. What's cool is it's shaken out that, they're still weak. So they go back into the bucket and they get slightly more buffs. I like this. This is good. I'm glad they're getting revisited, and we're getting, a good dozen or so champion changes every patch of things that are overperforming or underperforming. So Azir getting some health regen growth up to 0.75 and 10 flat damage on the Q. Here's the regen difference, 0 to 20%. Now keep in mind, basically every Azir ever tries to find some way to get Spell Vamp. So we very often see either Domination first for Electrocute and then Ravenous Hunter, or Domination secondary for Ravenous Hunter. 10 damage on Q, certainly pretty meaningful as well. Yeah, you max it first, but 10 damage is 10 damage. This means quite a bit. This is probably a solid 1% win rate bump to Azir. Yeah. Obviously, by the virtue of him being here, official data says they need it. Like, this is literally, official data says his champion is underperforming everywhere or OP somewhere. And like substantially OP somewhere. So I'm going to drop context for the rest of these sentences because every single one of these changes has data backing why it's being changed. So I'm not going to bring that up anymore. Here's that. Next up is Cho'Gath. This is pretty substantial. Getting 22% off the Q cooldown is quite meaningful. I don't believe this will change your ability order. You still... you max E first, it feels like in melee matchups. You max W first in ranged ones. Q's only level incentive is damage. I don't believe even the slow scales with rank. That could be wrong, but I don't believe it does. I don't think this cooldown change is enough to say damage scaling is enough to max it now. Because Cho'Gath's primary purpose is actually dealing damage. So like there is a reason to max Q if you can, like if Q's cooldown was 1 second, you'd max it first, right? Like there is a number at which you cool max his ability first and it's broken. That's probably not 7 seconds, but it's more likely. In fact, actually one thing I want to bring up is this will make AP Cho'Gath more viable because now you can spam Qs as a squishy and be more useful in team fights. That's a possibility. I don't think we're necessarily going to see it, but it's a possibility. If you want to play AP Cho'Gath and give me elo by being against me, go for it. Next up is Durmundo. 5% current health damage up on the Q and 10 to 20 damage up on the E. Keep in mind, E has both a headbutt that deals a bunch of damage, and then it has the flat AD amp afterwards. So let's break down these numbers. Here's Dr. Mundo's Q damage before and after. 15 to 25 became 20 to 30% current health. Now I want to point out, by the way, that Q also has a minimum damage, and that is 80 to 280 based on rank. So I put that into this as well. So if your target had between 533 and 1022 health remaining before the cleaver hit them, you're getting the full 33 to 20% bonus damage of this buff. If, however, your target had 400 or less, up to 933 or less health remaining, this buff does literally nothing. It was dealing minimum damage anyway. I want to make that very, very clear. So last hit and caster minions never changes. Melee minions don't change once you've maxed the ability. until very absurdly late into the game. I believe also the damage against monsters is capped. I think it only ever does minimum. I forget how the monster damage works. Either way, this means very little to potentially nothing against monsters. Just real quick there. But it certainly matters a lot more, obviously, in tankier matchups when they do have the health to spare and you're going to do more damage there. So, okay, there's the Q damage. Here is the E damage difference. I rolled in Dr. Mundo's base AD into this. E is typically maxed second. So here's these numbers. It's 10 to 5% on the minimum, 16 to 7% on the maximum. Not that big of a buff. Overall, though, both changes together seem pretty meaningful. I feel like these buffs mean... It's hard to say they mean more to top lane than they do to jungle, because the E buff means more to jungle, arguably, because you're getting those auto attacks out a lot. This is still a solid buff to him. This is probably a good 1.5% or so. I don't know exactly how weak Mundo is right now, but I think he's certainly very good into AP matches because of that bonus MR on the E, so Mundo's probably pretty reasonable. Next up, some pretty big changes to Garen. First off, his W scales faster and higher. And then the cooldown on his W is shorter. And keep in mind, the W has two parts to it. It has the this long duration part here of damage reduction. And it has a short duration part that lasts, 3/4 of a second, of a lot of bonus tenacity and a lot of bonus damage reduction. That's what this is pushing towards. Now, the Q and E rank up incentives for Garen are damage, and pretty substantially so. I don't believe this will do enough to make you max W second. If you do, that's going to be kind of nutty. That's going to be a very different look for that champion if it does happen. He's going to be really disruptive as a result. But overall, let's see what this does for him. So here are the resists. I'm assuming, erroneously, but I had to pick numbers, that he gets 10 CS per level. Exactly 10 CS per level. So here's the old bonuses, and it scales every 10 CS. He gets 2.5 armor and MR up to 40. Now he gains 3.3 armor and MR every 10 CS up to 50. Notice that at 150 CS he caps versus 160 CS he caps. He's always got more bonus resist because of course it does. The ratio is higher. And again, it requires less CS to be done. So 150 CS is the cap set of 160. Okay. And then I rolled in, assuming these numbers for his level scaling and CSing, I rolled in his base stats, and it's a 1 to 5% durability increase. Assuming you never buy armor and MR. He probably doesn't never buy armor and MR, so the real world bonus is a little bit lower, but hey, he's 5% tankier in the late game. That's not trivial. Here's the cooldown difference on W. Again, you probably max it last, so you're not getting the really big gains till very, very later on. But hey, 15 instead of 20 seconds is definitely a pretty meaningful cooldown difference. Keep in mind this guy buys Black Cleaver. That's immediate 20 CDR. It's if he really wants to be aggressive, he can go cooldown boots. He's not gonna. You can probably go for the scaling cooldown reduction thing in the rune shards, stat shards, whatever. All those are possibilities. Either way, what you've got is, as they say in these notes here, increased uptime on the W. So you're going to use the tenacity and stuff more often. This is definitely across the board buffs to Garen. It's really hard to say exactly how big of a buff this is. Again, this is barely a buff. It's a 1 second cooldown buff on the W at rank 1 of the ability. That's almost meaningless. Again, I don't think you're going to max W second. That seems like it's not going to be correct ever because he has to deal damage and he needs ranks to do that. This is pretty nice. Again, it's up to 5% more durability, so he'll gain something. It's a light touch. Next up, buffs to E's rank up and even the rank 1. I didn't check to be sure, but I'm almost certain you max E second in all cases. W max I think is too important for the resists, and Q doesn't have a cooldown scaling anymore, unless I'm completely trolling, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. So here is the Leona buff. Pretty substantial. Of course, 9 to 6 seconds is really meaningful at level 13 and beyond, so she is going to be much more mobile, a lot more durable, getting a lot more sunlight off in people. Seems pretty nice. This is cool. This is a good buff. I think Leona's a really good champion, really fun. I am terrified of her constantly whenever I play bot lane, but cool champ. Next up is Lissandra. Lissandra getting some pretty substantial nerfs to Q's cooldown. She is absolutely the queen of pro play right now. Silas is the king. He's getting nerfed later on in this patch. Don't worry about it. But Lissandra is not losing damage. She is losing wave clear. Now, that was the goal of the last time Lissandra got changed, when her mana costs went up on Q to try to get pros to not rush Proto Belt. And that was successful a lot of the time. But pros are just buying Lost Chapter and then Proto Belt second, and they're still wave clearing with impunity. So here's another way to nerf the wave clear is Q cooldown. They're hoping that she can't just outshove opponents, which is either to win lanes harder or to survive lanes that are difficult. This will hurt her last hitting under turret as well. It'll certainly affect her early laning phase. Maybe she'll have to press E more often as wave clear and burn mana that way. We'll see. Either way, here is the data table on the cooldown difference. Even though XD 1 second seems small, that is still a 33% cooldown increase. That is meaningful. Someone's going to be like, lol, but when she builds 40 CDR, it's only 0.6 seconds. Okay. That's still 33% of the cooldown, which means she's casting it 1/3 less often. That's a lot less damage in CC. This is very meaningful for her team fight damage as well as her wave clear. This is not a meaningless change. This probably is quite substantial. She might even get sub 50 in solo queue. She might be already, I'm not sure. But I think she will lose a lot in solo queue and pro. She will probably still be in the pro meta, but I think this is actually a very big nerf that will knock her off her 90% presence that she is right now in pro. Next up is Morgana. She was doing, she's doing very, very well in bot lane and even better in mid. And by bot lane, I do mean support, but I think she's actually a viable bot farm champion as well. So she's losing 1/8 of the AP ratio on W, and she's losing health regen growth. Now, what's interesting is these are scaling values, right? Mid laners level up more often, and mid laners get more gold to buy AP. Plus, they actually care about W damage. So this is very clearly a set of nerfs targeted at mid lane Morgana, which I think is good. I think that's eloquent. It's targeted. This is what I brought up earlier when I talked about the bucket changes being half automated. Is the idea of nerfing mid Morgana is automated. Designer still has to make nerfs that affect mid Morg more than support Morg. Enchanters are overall high win rate in solo queue. That will probably remain true for a very long time. Just because solo queue and pro are different beasts, and an easy thing to look at is the ability to ward cleanly, and tanks can do that more easily by face checking brushes, putting wards down without getting one shot. Morgana just gets one shot when a Vel'Koz catches her. Tahm Kench doesn't. At least less likely, right? So that's probably always going to be, there's going to be some level of difference between enchanter supports and tank supports from solo queue compared to pro, but anyway, yeah. Nerfs targeted at that, so here is the regen difference. I want to point out, by the way, that Morgana went from 0.6 to 0.4. Azir went from 0.55 to 0.75. So Morgana has absurdly low regen growth, but keep in mind she has inbuilt spell vamp on the kit. Q, W, and R all spell vamp against cannon minions and champions, so she has inbuilt regen tools. It's fine that her health regen growth is far below average. That seems reasonable to me. I don't have a problem with that, and I'm the base stat stickler guy, so again, I think health regen is one of the things you're totally allowed to have a lever for and just deal with as a player. Cool. All right. Next up is buffs to Pyke. 2 seconds to 0 off the Q and 0.15 seconds up on the E. This is about a 10% stun duration buff, of course. Keep in mind the stun duration does indeed scale with lethality. I forget what the exact capped number is. I could have looked it up, but I didn't. I'm sorry. It'll be less than 10% when he finishes things like Duskblade. Either way, it's still 0.15 seconds up on the stun. That's certainly meaningful. As far as the Q cooldown, I've got that data table. Qmax first is by far the most common. Here is that. Of course, it stops mattering at level 9. The E stun duration, of course, matters forever. This is definitely pretty meaningful. Pyke's very, very strong. He's a cool champion. I am very bad at Pyke. I would like to know how to play Pyke. I would like to be able to play him in solo queue, but I don't win when I do. I think he's my go-to normal game support champion, but otherwise I don't really have it. But cool to see him getting more power. Clearly he's not doing well, if that's what the buff is. Next up is Rumble, another champion that I really, really, really enjoy. I think he's a super cool champ. Being that he's weak, I don't really play him. I pick win rate champions that I also enjoy. That's how I play solo queue. I play good champions that are also fun. I tend to not play weak champions that are fun because I like winning. I pretty much exclusively play 50% plus win rate champions. That's me as a player. I'm an abuser. Anyway, though, 10% more move speed on the Scrap Shield and 10 to 20 seconds off the Equalizer. This is an absurdly low cooldown, by the way. 70 seconds max rank is ridiculously short. That said, Rumble doesn't have great access to CDR. He often goes Proto Belt. He can go Zonias. He can go Banshees. Those are all there. But he's not going Luden's Echo. He's not going cooldown boots. And he's probably going flat AP more than scaling CDR. And it's just hard for him to get a lot of CDR. So this kind of slightly helps in the sense that champions that tend to have longer cooldowns than Rumble can, in a real game, have shorter cooldowns than Rumble because they all build Luden's Echo. And that can be problematic. That I think it's kind of okay for Rumble to have absurdly short cooldowns because his builds don't allow it. And in fact, his mechanics specifically disincentivize building cooldown reduction because you'll overheat and turn off your spells anyway, and then CDR does literally nothing while you're overheated, right? He has not necessarily dyssynergy because you can always just wait and cast the spell, but his CDR scaling literally turns off at certain points of his kit. So I think totally reasonable that he has absurd cooldowns in other places. Either way, 10% move speed on Scrap Shield is this in the real world. Close to 10% more move speed, 9 to 8. I forget if there's an AP scaling on the move speed or not. Doesn't really matter. It's not going to change that much. Here's the R cooldown. Pretty meaningful here. 9 to 22% is quite a big deal. That's pretty big. That's definitely pretty big. This will help him get back to lane. It'll help him kite melee matchups. It'll help him chase people down. This definitely means quite a lot. This is a fairly big movement difference there. Yeah, this is a pretty big buff to Rumble. Definitely is. Definitely is a big buff to Rumble. Next up is Silas. Silas' base health regen goes down to 9, from 9.5 to 7.5. I want to point out, by the way, Silas' health regen growth is a solid 1.0. We looked earlier at a 0, went from 0.55 to 0.75. Morgana went from 0.6 to 0.4. Silas has a self-healing W and has a 1 health regen growth. Now, that said, Silas is melee. He does deserve to have high regen. He is melee. He's going to take more damage than other champions. So that, to a certain degree, is reasonable. But he also has self-healing. Now, one thing I want to point out is everyone is more and more commonly now maxing W second and maxing E last. And the change here is basically that maxing W maybe goes to third, and maxing E maybe goes to second. Now, that might just be wrong, and it was wrong of me to make that assumption, but it certainly pushes you in that direction, because the cooldown going down 2 seconds now goes down 8 seconds, and your W gaining 120 damage now only gains 100 damage. Now, the healing still scales, the cooldown on W still scales, and those are relevant as well, don't get me wrong, but this might be enough to change the ability order, and W, if it remains a 1-point wonder. Now, keep in mind, the healing only roughly doubles at max rank, so you don't have that insane of need to max W. Of course, the healing matters, don't get me wrong, but hey, the E shield goes up as well, so could be a total possibility. Anyway, here are the changes, all 3 of them. Here is the old and new regen, 20% lower in the early game, less so in the late game. Assuming you do, in fact, switch to W max last, here is the old and new W damage. It troughs really heavily, of course, because at level 13 it would have been maxed, but it's rank 1 here. In the real world, every change is exactly 17%, because it remained that same sort of linear difference. So if that's not happening, just look at this. It's 83 the whole way through, right? 83 at max rank, first rank, we're good. But the E cooldown, right, it was 12 to 10, now it's 18 to 10. If you were going to max it last, it's 150% of the cooldown for almost ever and remains red until max rank of 10 each. But I'm going to assume you are maxing at second, which means he will still remain less mobile for a very, very long time. He has to get to rank 4 of the ability. to match the same cooldown as rank 1 of the old ability. That is substantial. Even if you max it second, because I don't think you're maxing it first, that seems super troll. Even if you max it second, he is still less durable through less mobile through level 12. That's meaningful. That's definitely a big deal right there. That's going to mean quite a bit. Either way, this is always a nerf, and this is always a nerf, and this is always a nerf. These are big hits to Sylas. Sylas is 100% pick banned in Pro across 9.6. He is absolutely, if Lyssandra's the queen, he is absolutely the king of Pro play. Definitely need to be nerfed, and needed to be nerfed hard. These nerfs do feel heavy enough to warrant a second look for Pro teams to say, hey, maybe we can beat him now. Of course, again, playoffs won't change. 9.6 remains the NA and EU playoff patch. I'm not certain about LPL or LCK. But when teams prep for MSI, they should be looking at, is Sylas worth banning anymore? They should be. They might not, because they've got other things to worry about. They might just say, screw it, on Red 70, always ban Sylas. But there's a decent chance Sylas is freed up. It might be that they still decide, they scrim it a couple times, they go, nope, Sylas is still too good. That is still possible. It's still possible, but we'll see. He's also very good in solo queue, so it's like, it's a viable nerf everywhere. Next up, small buffs to tank junglers in their clear speed. Cinderhulk has a 50% multiplicative, more damage against jungle monsters. Only Cinderhulk though, not the Bomby Cinder, not a Sunfire Cape. Only the Cinderhulk itself. I think that's cool. I think it's a good thing. That'll help them clear more quickly, get their gold incomes, be a real frontliner. Anytime you can have tanks more viable in jungle and top, you are more likely to have tanks not required in the support role. That seems solid. That's a cool thing. Okay, great. Next up is Darkseal, which, by the way, was absurdly gold efficient by itself, then also had a bunch of like scaling bonuses. I think you still always buy a Darkseal every game if you're a mage. I think it's just worth buying, because especially with the sellback value being so good before. But considering that 15 AP was worth 300 and, I don't know, call it 30 gold, 25, whatever, and Darkseal cost 350, plus gave mana, plus gave potion efficiency, plus gave that soul stealing bonus. Now you only get 217 gold worth of ability power, or whatever the number actually is, 212, something like that. But you still get that mana, you still get the regen. You might still stack Darkseals, but with the sellback value now, now that you lose 210 of the gold you invested, you're more likely to not stack Darkseals. Maybe you only buy one. But I think it's likely the days of Corrupting Potion, double Darkseal are maybe behind us. We'll see. It's still quite a good item. It probably took me longer than it should have for me to realize how silly stacking Darkseals really was. Either way, I think it's good that this is getting nerfed. Okay, great. Next up, a rework to Wit's End. Cost up by 500. That's substantial. But you get 10% attack speed, 10 MR, 5% move speed. Okay, so far these are all buffs that make up for the cost, straight up. The on-hit damage changes from 42 to 15 to 80. That's pretty meaningful. I chose the midpoint here and chose basically 45 for my calculations, which we'll see in a second. But instead of stealing 30 armor MR, you instead heal on hit by 15 to 80. Which is a very substantial amount of lifesteal, by the way. Keep in mind that even if you're buying like a Black Cleaver on a Juggernaut or a Titanic Cleaver on a Juggernaut, you're at like maybe up to almost 200 health. And if you had like 15% lifesteal, which is higher than most champions have, 50% lifesteal on 200 AD is 30 health back on hit. You're going to get more than that out of this item. So this is very real lifesteal. This is very real amounts of lifesteal. Like, outside of Ravenous Hydra literally giving the splash damage, also healing. So let's call it more like let's call it it's rough because like Death's Dance makes your spells lifesteal and whatnot. So like there's not a great like Juggernaut 1-to-1 comparison because they buy a bunch of fraudulent, not just lifesteal items. But like this is realistically Bloodthirster levels of health back. Legitimately, like this is absurd sustain. So yeah, straight up, this is really good sustain. I want to make that very clear. That's very, very high. Anyway, here is the math. Wits End in 9.6 gave 1,000 gold worth of attack speed, now gives 1,250 worth of attack speed. It gave 720 worth of MR, now gives 900 worth of MR. On hit damage of 42, using on hit damage calculations, looking at like things like recurve bow. By the way, on hit damage is calculated as basically worth half an attack damage per point, because it does give you damage on attacks, but not on spells. Half is pretty reasonable. That's what recurve bow is costed. Seems fine. And I chose, again, 45 as my on-hit damage calculation. Keep in mind that when you're looking at this, 812 gold worth of on-hit damage, if you could buy this item at like level 1 or something, it's 1/3 as good, and at level 18, it's twice as good. So when you look at the efficiency and you're like, oh, it's 200 gold above efficiency, it's like, well, if you're only doing 20 on-hit damage, it's not efficient, and if you're doing 80, it's absurdly efficient. So keep that in mind, right? That not counting the heal, which would also, of course, go down, you have that kind of stuff going on. Do want to point out, again, that the healing is 1/3 for ranged champions. And again, because his on-hit damage indeed does scale, it's not as good of a first item, but as a late-game item, and I'm not even adding in the on-hit healing, which, again, is a lot, this is almost a 4,000 gold worth of stats item. Like, if you actually have your maxed out on hit damage and you care about the healing at all, this is 4,000 gold worth of stats for 2,900 gold. This is probably required in every 6-item build if you're a melee auto attacker. You should legit consider buying it on, like, Sejuani and stuff. It's a little fraudulent on tanks, but, like, we're not costing on hit damage as attack damage. We're to be fair, we are still costing this 80 on hit damage as 40 AD in the end game calculations here, when we're saying it's a 4,000 gold item. But 80 on hit damage is a lot when you have 50% bonus attack speed. This could be very, 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 very meaningful. Also keep in mind, the 80 on hit damage is full value when you're Kog'Maw or Kaisa or something. Again, at level 18, not at level 7 when you can rush the item. And that's kind of interesting as well when you think about it, because 80 on-hit damage, when you're a level 18 Kaisa, maybe you'd rather just have an Infinity Edge. Because that'll give you 80 damage on hit, and you'll crit half of them with your already bought Hurricane. So, probably better. I'm not sure. But based on how multiplicative your other items are, this may or may not be a very, very big deal. Other champs that care about this, you think of things like Kale. Yeah, it's only 27 damage on, 27 health back on hit. But again, keep in mind, here's a big one. Are you ready? Ranged champions can buy Hurricane, which means they're only getting 1/3 of the health back, but they're hitting 3 times as often. So, they kinda, for any ranged on hit champion, they're kind of getting the same health back. This is a very big deal. This item could very well be meta shaping. Think back to, and I want to point out though that this could take a long time to sort out. My consistent go-to for this is when, I think it was 2017 through the middle of 2018 through MSI, Blade of the Ruined King was stealthily the best item in the game on ranged champions. And 2017 was a metagame that was pretty full of Kog'Maw and Varus and all these on-hit champions, but they kept going Blade of the Ruined King first. And then finally, one day they realized they should be rushing Rageblade instead. And the 2018 MSI was won by Uzi with Rageblade Kaisa, and he popped off really hard. And people realized that Rageblade, and it was in the same state for a very long time, keep in mind, right? The extra free on-hit damage, holy crap, that's absurd. That was around for a while and was never really fully abused for some time. And eventually people figured it out. Wit's End feels like that level of power. I think this item could be absolutely insane. and could absolutely determine the metagame. Because when the best champion in the game is Rageblade Kaisa or Rageblade Kog'Maw, it's worth building your team comp around that champion. And if you've got 3 champs who are gonna go full tank and buy a Wit's End and just slaughter everyone, there's a chance, maybe small, but there is a chance that we're in a metagame of mages suck, everyone buys Wit's End, and all the ranged champions get a Hurricane and buy this item as well, and we're in the magic damage on hit era. When everyone's got 50 MR in their core item build, mages are weak. Might not be happening, but there is a chance this item has very far-reaching implications. Or the champ or the item is somehow actually underpowered and losing the 30 MR steal, which is your opponent is down 30 and you're plus 30. That is definitely meaningful. Or this is true. This means a lot. This 42 damage when you first buy the item actually means a lot, and Wit's End was only ever good as a rush item, and this isn't good enough. That is also possibly true. It really could go anywhere. Items are very complex because they intersect with basically everything else in the game. It's hard to say with absolute certainty. I believe this item is very, 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 very good, and I'm going to be trying every time I get put as a jungler or a top laner. I'm going to buy this item, and I'm going to try to gain some elo. Udyr probably gains some power. I could see Vi buying this item second or third. Like, imagine just going Warrior, Wit's End, Vi. Dead Man's Plate afterwards. You're a really good bruiser. This is a great, great, great bruiser item, right? And they're saying, yes, this is supposed to be slot efficient for bruisers with attack speed. After they buy Steric's Gauge, they buy this as well. Now they've got health, they've got a shield, we'll see. We'll see. Move speed is nice, of course, for fighters as well, of course. Okay, let's move on. I spent way too long on that item. Immolate combat text now upticks overall. You can see how much damage you dealt to your jungle monsters. That's great. I think that's really cool. What's kind of fun with this, actually, I like, is when you're jungling and you're like taking Gromp or red buff or blue buff or whatever, you're taking like one of these big camps, you can see how fast you killed the camp by seeing how much damage Immolate dealt to like Big Raptor. You're like, oh, I had to Immolate the Raptor for like 700 damage. Wow, I'm a really slow jungler. I think it's interesting. Next up is a big rework of Eyeball Collection, Ghost Poro, and Zombie Ward. In short, read this. All 3 runes now gave the exact same adaptive force bonus of 30 AP or 18 attack damage. The difference is you're going to get stacks by getting 10 kills or assists, and then bam, 30 bonus stats. Or you Ghost Poro by spawning 10 Ghost Poros. And you get a Ghost Poro by having your ward expire without being swept. That is Yellow Trinket and Sightstone only. Keep in mind, early game trinket cooldowns are a solid 3 minutes. This scales down over time, don't get me wrong. I think it scales down to like 2 minutes, though. It's still pretty long. I think that's correct. Which means you're still looking at like 25 minutes into the game if no one ever sweeps any wards you ever put down. That seems unlikely. This seems very good for supports to gain 30 free ability power, because for sure their wards will eventually time out. That's going to happen for them. But AD carries are switching to Blue Trinket at level 9. And if they're not, they're trolling. Which means they're not going Ghost Poro, they're going Eyeball Collection. Mid laners, actually, well, let's talk about junglers. Junglers should absolutely switch to Sweeper early game. They're not going Ghost Poro, they're going Eyeball Collection. Top laners, top laners sometimes keep their own Sweeper. They'll keep their own ward, and slowly but surely, eventually, they will get their 30 ability power. But again, that'll be towards the end of the game. But you also still get the free Ghost Poro ward. And notice that you spawn a Ghost Poro when it expires, granting vision until it's scared away by enemy champions. So, like, you can put an aggressive ward down somewhere, and it could last for freaking ever. That could be really, really, really good. It might not be the AP that really makes this thing good. It's, look, I'm just going to ward that one brush that those junglers like to run through. And essentially, my Trinket Ward lasts forever until they run through the brush. The AP is nice, and I get 2 AP for the very first time it spawns, that's actually pretty quick. That's pretty easy. But infinite duration Trinket Ward, if they never run by it, that's really good. That's really good. That is a new benefit that we haven't really had before. I mean, like old Ghost Portal did that, but it had a duration. This, unless I'm misreading this, doesn't have a duration. It stays until it's scared away. So if you can sneak those wards into enemy territory and they last, that's a really big deal. That can mean a lot. All right. Also, we have Zombie Ward, which changes slightly. Instead of damaging a champion for clearing a ward, you get your Adaptive Force. Clearing 10 wards is not that difficult. And keep in mind, that counts killing blue trinket wards. It counts regular trinket wards. It counts Sightstone. It counts control wards. This is totally doable. Supports might do Zombie Ward instead. Junglers will probably do Zombie Ward instead. You still get to spawn a Zombie Ward, which is nice. And what's cool is, yeah, you probably do sweep 10 wards before you get 10 assists. Probably. I'm not completely sure, but there's a pretty good chance. That's cool. What's kind of weird is there might be some very small metagame implications where junglers rush sweeper and run bot lane a lot and just like say, hey, I know their support would have warded. Let's go kill this. And then like all of you get bonus AP. Zombie Ward is usable on AD carries as well, as long as you follow your support around and sweep with them, as long as you tag the ward once. I believe clearing a ward counts you tagging it once, even if someone else gets the kill credit. If your sweeper touches it and they kill it, I think that counts as well. I'm not completely certain. Wait, actually, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, I mean, this is interesting. This is actually very interesting. Eyeball collection, like you're gonna get 10 kills resist eventually. Ghost Portal is not going to work for a lot of champions. Optimal play dictates that a lot of champions switch off Ghost Portal. Zombie Ward looks kind of interesting. Like, this is cool. And these seem fun to interact with, ultimately. That's what I feel like. Next up is Cut Down. Was buffed to 9.5. Still getting buffed. Of course, there's data on rune choice as well. So 5 to 50% bonus damage. One of the kind of funny things is that's sort of awkward here is AD carries tend to have actually very, very high health. They're given really high health pools because they're stuck in 2v2 lanes and frequently don't have escapes. Like Jinx starts at like 585 health or something. Like Twitch is the same. They're very, very durable at level 1. So you frequently just have more health than a lot of other champions until later on in the game. So it can be hard to actually turn this on in some cases. But either way, good to see this buff. That's good. Demolish getting a minor buff here. I didn't choose to throw any math on it. 5% max health is, generally speaking, right, if you have 300 and something max HP, these are equal. No one has 300 max HP. They have 600 max HP. So most of the damage of Demolish is carried by the health ratio. That's up about 15%. Cool. Overgrowth buffed on the completion bonus. That's nice. Cool. More health. Hey, if more people run Overgrowth, then Cut Down's better. Okay. Predator no longer turns off when Hunter's Talisman hits monsters. That's good. I'm really glad to see this buff, by the way. By far, Ravenous Hunter has been the most common rune choice in that group. Even if you wanted to use ultimates to be cool, it just wasn't ever worth it. I'm glad to see this buff to 20% off your ult cooldown. That's enough to really matter. This feels pretty substantial. This is pretty exciting. This is a pretty exciting buff. I'm hopeful that we start seeing Ultimate Hunter more. It's conceptually really fun and exciting, so I'm hoping we see more of that. Cool beans, stuff to practice tool, some ARAM changes. Butcher's Bridge is back. Bans exist. Minions gain move speed and champs do more damage to structures. Poke damage is lower. Barrier is gone. Instead, there is Backtrack, which blinks you backwards. So you can basically pop this all in a Zed and get out for free, or all in his Rengar and get out for free. Mariner's Vengeance, Ghostwalkers and stuff. So yeah, a bunch of the old items have come back as well. This is pretty exciting. A bunch of champion balance. There's a bunch of damage taken, damage received, damage dealt, getting shifted around to try to balance champions out, kind of scrunch those values a bit closer together. That's a good thing. 64-bit Mac client, that's cool. That's a bug, but I guess it'll change. Your shop is coming back. I probably have some Kale skins. Bunch of bug fixes that I never read through because they usually aren't big enough to exist here. I guess there's a CDR bug, whatever. Okay. And hey, Dunkmaster Iron and Hextech Jarvan 4 coming in. Chromos for the both of them. That's the patch. It's the 50-minute mark. It's time for the TLDR. I waited 3 seconds to say that because I have a little countdown timer that shows me that was happening. Okay, lots going on. Kale OP in solo queue, not OP in pro. Overall, weaker pretty substantially. AP builds are better. AD builds are weak. Well, AP builds are, I should say, less nerfed than AD builds. Urgot, pretty substantial nerfs to his late game, levels 11 onward. Minor cooldown nerf on his dash. Minor mana cost nerf on the dash. Minor damage nerf on the R. Small Urgot nerfs, but meaningful. Regen and damage on Azir is up. That's quite nice. Doesn't mean a ton. It's just generic power. Cho'Gath Q power is kind of nice. There is a very small chance you max Q second, but I doubt it, but it's possible. This is also a buff to AP Cho'Gath, who would max Q second. Dr. Mundo gaining some extra damage on the cleaver against healthy enough targets. Bit of extra attack damage on the E is nice as well. This is a pretty big deal. This should be quite a big buff. Garen's W gives more total resists, and it actually stacks up overall sooner despite the higher cap. It's still faster. W cooldown buff means very, very little because it's going to be a 1-point wonder for a very long time. I don't think this means very much to Garen. It's a little bit, it's kind of nice, but it's not huge. Pretty big buff to the second max for Leona on the E. That, and even at rank 1, it's better as well. This feels pretty substantial. Leona should gain a fair bit. 4 to 1 seconds up on Lissandra's Q cooldown. That's pretty meaningful in my opinion. That should mean quite a bit. Maybe she drops off number 1, number 2 in pro. Probably dips sub 50 in solo queue. Morgana also getting mid lane nerfs with scaling going down and ratios going down. Probably still high win rate in both roles though. Pike gaining 2 seconds on the Q and 0.15 seconds on the E stun. It's 2 to 0 seconds on the Q, I should say. Definitely a pretty solid buff. Gets him right close to 50%. That's good. 10% move speed on the W. 10 to 20 seconds off the R. Pretty meaningful as well. Good to see that. Gets pretty close to viable. Sylas needs gigantic nerfs. He's the best champ in pro play. No one lets you play him at all. Flat 2 health regen gone. 10 to 30 off the W. Empowered at 1.5. Gigantic cooldown nerf on the E. Really, really big deal. Very big Sylas nerf. Definitely needs it. Cool to see that though. We'll see what happens. Might drop off of number 1 at pro, but he'll still be around quite a bit. Jungle buff to Cinderhulk seems nice. Darksteel, maybe we don't see 3 Darksteels per champ anymore, but it's still actually gold efficient on itself. Even with this, the problem is the sellback cost goes down by 105. That is meaningful. That probably kills the 3 Darkseals. You can probably still buy 1, and it's worth it because of the soul stacking, but that's probably it. Huge rework to Wit's End. 500 gold more expensive for 10 attack speed, 10 MR, 5 move speed, on hit damage that scales, and you heal for the amount of damage dealt by Wit's Ends on hit, 15 to 80, or, 5 to 26, or whatever. That's a pretty big deal. Yeah, you lose the MR shred, but this is pretty big. This item could be absolutely bonkers overpowered. It would not shock me if Wit's End had to be nerfed by like 200 gold or something next patch. I'm not sure for certain, but that's true. It's hard to say. A lot of moving parts here. For example, I know that I got, when Rageblade got reworked, I got that one wrong by a lot. It was broken, and I didn't call that one. I could be wrong here. It's hard to know for sure. But we'll see what happens. Minor stuff here. Eyeball Collection, Ghost Poro, and Zombie Ward all give 30 AP or 18 attack damage on full stacks. You stack Eyeball Collection by getting 10 kills and assists. You stack Ghost Poro by having 10 wards of yours time out. And you stack Zombie Ward by killing 10 enemy wards. Zombie Ward still gives you the zombie, and Ghost Poro still gives you the Ghost Poro when your wards time out. Eyeball Collection is just killer assist. There are best users for each one of these. They're actually, certainly Zombie Ward and Ghost Ward give you better vision tools, but kills and assists are more generically powerful, more generically easy to access, so we'll see. Minor buff to Cut Down, minor buff to Demolish, minor buff to Overgrowth, nice little minor thing to Predator, and a minor buff to Ultimate Hunter are all nice. Those runes were all a bit weak and could use the help, so that's cool. stuff for practice tool. Huge changes to ARAM. Those are really sweet. I'm looking forward to it. I do like me some ARAM. There's some really cool changes. Read these yourself if you like them. But ultimately, a new summoner spell, anti-poke, individual champion balance, rune cooldown rebalance, couple of new items. Bans are existing. Butcher's Bridge is back. A lot of cool stuff. I'm looking forward to this. Looks pretty sweet. Other stuff like Mac Client, your shop returning some bug fixes, and these new skins. Also pretty cool. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.